Hello and welcome to part 2 of Behind the Scenes, how I built the 10-gallon Dripwall terrarium. This is the first of 3 parts about creating the foundation of the terrarium. In this one, we're going to finish the underlying framework, add a few pieces of wood to the hardscape, and start a secondary drip line. Here are some initial pieces of wood that I was using. This is mopani wood, which is a really dense, really heavy hardwood. And I like mopani wood because it lasts pretty much forever and it has a lot of character to it. I like the bark and the texture and all the cool shapes and stuff. So it's a really interesting wood, and I started out with all these pieces. Now I had a hardscape idea in mind from the beginning, but as it often happens when you start working with these kind of things, you either come up with a new idea or you realize that the first idea wasn't going to work. So I'm going to show you a photo that shows all of the wood in, and it's going to have a bunch of other stuff in the tank, foam and a bunch of other things, but I want to show you so that you see the overall layout of everything first, and then we'll go back in time and I'll show you how I got up to this point. So this is the wood layout. This is basically what I came up with for the tank. So we'll go back in time now and I'll show you how I arrived at this. This is the foam that I use. It's a polyurethane expanding foam. I'll share some information about the expanding foams just in case you don't know what they are or why we use them. Most of the foam sprays were originally created to be used in building construction for sealing windows and other gaps. A few were made for landscaping like the one I have here. There's a lot of good reasons why we use this for terrarium and vivarium builds. First of all, they offer an easy, cheap, and fast way to create landscape foundations. Second, they're easy to carve and work with once dried. And third, once cured, they're completely waterproof, inert, and safe for all plants and animals. A lot of people use Great Stuff foam. This is Touch and Foam. There's a variety of different brands. They're all pretty similar. I like the Touch and Foam Landscape because it's black and it's easily acquired locally at Fred Meyer. So grab a bunch of cans of that and we're good to go. Here is the structure coming together inside of the tank here. I used a bunch of grid to create some more foundational pieces. I built some kind of boxes and shapes with zip ties. I'll zoom in here. You can see got zip ties here and created structure, and then you can kind of spot weld with the foam and build things together. You can create little boxes and shapes and sort of ledges, if you will, and you can cut at angles and create braces for those. So anyway, I worked on that for a while, and as I was doing this, I was putting wood in there by hand and trying to visualize how everything was going to come together. Now, the reason why I built these is because that wood is extremely heavy, and this is a tall tank, and so I needed ways to suspend that wood and create ways to lock that wood in position that is not going to risk having things fall apart. Here's a prototyping session where I was holding the wood in there by hand, and it all just kind of pieced together, and I liked the way it looked. So this is how it started to come together. Here's another just prototyping, and I was taking photos so that I could memorize the position of the different pieces of wood and kind of see how the pieces come together. Then this is where I have one of the pieces of wood in there, and I started foaming more of this touch and foam in, and what I do is I cover that with a plastic bag, that piece of wood, because I don't want the foam to get onto the wood in the areas that is going to be showing in the display of the tank. And then I just leave the exposed parts of the wood where I'm putting the foam in so that it can lock the wood in place. And I have just a bag of gravel in here to kind of hold the wood in place. You can see it's just a bag of aquarium gravel, and I have that leaning in there so that it holds the wood in, and then I just sprayed a bunch of foam and locked that wood in. Here's a close-up of the piece of wood, and you can see the foam just kind of wraps around there and locks it in place. And here's an additional photo with just some prototyping and planning out and thinking about where the drip system and lines are going to go. It's important to note that when you're doing the foam, you should practice with it and get a lot of experience with it before doing any complex builds like this one, because you want to make sure you use the right amount of foam and that you do the correct thickness and that you let it cure in between sessions so that you can kind of build up from it instead of just putting a whole bunch at once, because it tends to cave in if you do too much. By building those boxes and ledges, I was able to get this wood suspended so that there's an area area for the water and dripping and and plants and stuff, and that way it adds interest. I had this gap near the bottom where I wanted there to be kind of a ledge going from the wood over to the side, and so what I did is I took a piece of this egg crate and I cut some sharp edges on it and a little shape, and then what I did is I jammed that into the foam. This foam was already cured, and I was able to jam those kind of spikes in there, and then I don't have a photo of it, but then I just put foam over this and kind of covered that, and then I was able to create a little ledge that came across, and then later I ended up putting a plant and some other stuff on there. At this point, I started working on the more detailed drip system layout because I wanted to figure out where the water would drip and if I wanted to put it behind the pieces of wood so that I could strategically place stronger flows of water coming out from in between the pieces of wood and so forth. So I wanted to do that before I put the final piece of wood in. So I found these little 1/4 inch fittings that are for drip systems. I think it's called Rainbird, and they're just little like barbs, and so I was able to poke little holes in the vinyl hose and then I could punch the barb through. And then what I ended up using is an air hose for an aquarium air pump. It's a 1/4 inch perfectly sized vinyl hose that can go slide right over the barb fitting. There's actually 2 hoses right here. The air hose is inside of this, and then there's a bigger hose on the outside, and I'm going to show you later the thinner hose separate. What I wanted to do here is create an outer sleeve so that when I put the foam and the wood and stuff in, it would protect the inner drip line from being crushed as much, because it was so thin that I did not want to risk the foam expanding and the wood pressing on it and then blocking that drip line. So I put some thicker outer vinyl hose on the outside, and I'll show you more detailed pictures later. But this is the initial line that goes down behind the main piece of wood into the center of the drip tank.